There is a specific kind of heartbreak that does not explode all at once. It leaks, slowly, quietly. You do not wake up one morning and discover you were never truly chosen. You discover it in fragments, in delayed replies that somehow always arrive just before you are ready to walk away, in future promises that never become dates, in affection that feels real, but strangely temporary. And the terrifying part is this: most people trapped in placeholder relationships are not weak. They are emotionally intelligent enough to notice the contradictions, but emotionally attached enough to explain them away. Psychologists call this commitment asymmetry. One person is building, the other person is waiting. And the deeper tragedy is that the waiting person often does not even realize they are waiting. They think they are taking things slow. They think love simply needs patience. But patience becomes dangerous when it is feeding someone else's indecision. A relationship should calm your nervous system over time. Placeholder dynamics do the opposite. They slowly train your brain into hypervigilance. You begin studying tone shifts, timing, energy changes, message patterns. You become a relationship detective instead of a partner. And what makes this dynamic psychologically devastating is something researchers call intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism used in gambling addiction. Unpredictable reward creates stronger emotional dependency than consistent reward. That means the occasional affection, the random emotional closeness, the sudden intense attention after distance does not weaken attachment. It strengthens it. That is why people stay far longer than logic can explain. And that is where the first story begins. Not in fiction. In a relationship, millions of people watched unfold publicly without understanding what they were actually seeing. Selena Gomez spent years inside an emotional cycle with Justin Bieber that psychologists later described as a textbook example of unstable attachment reinforcement. The relationship repeatedly ended and restarted over nearly a decade. Every breakup looked final, every reunion looked hopeful, and every return created the illusion that this time the uncertainty had finally transformed into commitment. But uncertainty itself had become the relationship. Researchers studying unstable romantic bonds often point to a phenomenon called trauma bonding. Not trauma in the dramatic cinematic sense, emotional inconsistency, periods of affection mixed with emotional withdrawal. Your nervous system stops asking, "Am I loved?" It begins asking, "How do I get the love back?" That shift changes everything, because now you are no longer evaluating the relationship clearly. You are chasing emotional relief. People outside the relationship kept asking a simple question: if they love each other so much, why can't they make it work? But love is not the same thing as commitment. Attachment is not the same thing as stability. And chemistry is absolutely not the same thing as emotional availability. One of the most psychologically revealing moments came years later when Selena openly discussed the emotional exhaustion that relationship created inside her life. Not because the feelings were fake, because the inconsistency slowly eroded her emotional center. That is what placeholder dynamics do. They keep hope alive while slowly destroying certainty. And certainty is what allows human beings to feel safe. Without safety, love becomes emotional survival. Now, something important happens in these relationships that many people completely misunderstand. The less committed partner often does care about you, deeply sometimes. But caring is not choosing, and confusing those two things is where people lose years of their lives. That brings us to another story, one far more brutal, because almost nobody saw the manipulation at first. When actress Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt separated, the public narrative quickly shifted toward compatibility issues and personal growth. But relationship analysts later became fascinated by what happened psychologically afterward. Because Brad emotionally transitioned toward another relationship before fully emotionally exiting the previous one. This is connected to something sociologists call mate-switching strategy, a phenomenon where individuals psychologically prepare a replacement attachment before leaving an existing bond. Humans rarely like emotional voids. Some people leave relationships cleanly, others emotionally overlap them, and placeholder relationships often exist precisely in that overlap zone. One person senses emotional distance, but the other keeps enough warmth alive to delay confrontation. Why? Because ending access to emotional support before securing a new attachment feels psychologically risky to them, so they maintain both. Not always maliciously, sometimes unconsciously, but the damage to the more invested partner is enormous, because ambiguity creates obsessive thinking. Neuroscientists discovered that uncertainty activates the brain's threat systems more intensely than direct rejection. Direct rejection hurts. Ambiguity consumes. Your brain keeps searching for resolution. You replay conversations, micro-expressions, message timing. Suddenly, your emotional energy is being burned not on connection, but interpretation. And this is why people in placeholder relationships often feel exhausted even when nothing bad happened. Something bad is happening. Your nervous system is living without clarity. Human beings are not designed to emotionally thrive in permanent uncertainty. Then there is the most dangerous version of all, the relationship where everything looks almost perfect. No obvious betrayal. No dramatic mistreatment. No screaming fights. Just a subtle chronic feeling that you are emotionally alone inside the relationship. This dynamic appeared publicly in the marriage of Princess Diana Spencer and Charles III, long before the world fully understood what emotional neglect looked like. Years later, people focused heavily on infidelity scandals, but psychologists examining the relationship noticed something deeper underneath it: emotional asymmetry. Diana appeared profoundly, emotionally invested. Charles appeared psychologically divided from the beginning. And the devastating part about emotionally asymmetrical relationships is that the more emotionally invested partner often works harder instead of stepping back. This is called protest behavior in attachment psychology. When emotional security decreases, anxious partners often increase effort, more affection, more understanding, more patience, more emotional labor. They believe increased love will restore connection. But emotional asymmetry rarely improves through increased effort from one side. It usually worsens because one person is fighting for stability while the other is adapting to imbalance. And eventually the relationship develops invisible emotional gravity. One person constantly reaches, the other constantly receives. That imbalance slowly destroys self-worth. This is why many people leave placeholder relationships feeling psychologically smaller than when they entered them. Not because they lacked value, because they spent years trying to earn reassurance that should have been freely given. Now here is where the topic becomes uncomfortable, because some viewers are beginning to recognize something else, not themselves as the placeholder, themselves as the person keeping someone else there. That realization is painful, but psychologically important. There are people who maintain emotionally incomplete relationships not because they are evil, but because they are terrified. Terrified of loneliness, terrified of commitment, terrified of making the wrong choice. Psychologists call this avoidant attachment regulation. The person wants emotional connection close enough to soothe loneliness, but distant enough to preserve escape routes. And one of the clearest public examples of emotional avoidance appeared in the long relational history surrounding Leonardo DiCaprio. Over decades, public conversations repeatedly focused on the same pattern: intense relationships, emotional closeness, then eventual withdrawal before deeper permanence. The internet mocked it as preference. Psychologists saw something potentially more complicated. Avoidantly attached individuals often experience increasing psychological discomfort as relationships become more permanent. The deeper intimacy gets, the stronger the subconscious urge for distance becomes. Not because intimacy is unwanted, because vulnerability feels threatening, and placeholder relationships thrive inside this exact mechanism. One partner mistakes emotional presence for emotional permanence, but permanence was never internally decided. This is why people trapped in these relationships constantly feel they are almost there, almost secure, almost official, almost chosen. But almost can quietly consume 10 years of your life. And the frightening part? Humans adapt to emotional deprivation gradually. You stop expecting consistency. You stop asking direct questions. You stop expressing needs clearly. You become grateful for partial effort. That psychological shrinking happens so slowly, most people never notice it. Until one day they hear someone else describe healthy love and realize they have been surviving crumbs while calling it patience. Now, the final story matters because it reveals the ending most placeholder relationships eventually reach. And it happened in front of the entire world. When Taylor Swift released multiple songs dissecting emotionally unavailable relationships, relationship therapists noticed something remarkable in the audience response. Millions of people identified with the same emotional pattern, being emotionally invested in someone who remained psychologically non-committal. One relationship in particular became heavily analyzed online after years of speculation about emotional distance and long-term uncertainty. And the public reaction revealed something disturbing. People normalized emotional ambiguity because it lasted a long time. But duration is not proof of commitment. Some relationships survive for years simply because one person keeps hoping while the other keeps hesitating. Longevity can hide dysfunction extremely well, especially when there is affection involved. And this leads to the most important psychological truth in the entire video. A person who truly chooses you reduces confusion over time, not increases it. Healthy love clarifies. Placeholder love destabilizes. Healthy love may move slowly, but it moves. There is progression, integration, definition, consistency, a deepening sense of emotional safety. Placeholder dynamics create the opposite experience. You become more anxious as time passes, not less, more uncertain, not more secure, and eventually, your identity starts organizing itself around emotional waiting, waiting for reassurance, waiting for commitment, waiting for clarity, waiting for them to finally become who you hoped they were. But people are not projects. Potential is not commitment. Chemistry is not loyalty. And effort that only appears when you pull away is not devotion. It is fear of losing access. Now here is the difficult question. Why do intelligent people stay in these relationships so long? Because the human brain is not rational under emotional attachment, especially when hope is involved. Hope is neurologically intoxicating. Studies on dopamine pathways show that anticipated reward can activate the brain more intensely than guaranteed reward. That means uncertainty itself can become chemically addictive. The possibility of finally being chosen becomes emotionally consuming. And the longer you invest, the harder leaving becomes. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. Humans irrationally continue investments because of resources already spent. Time, emotion, memories, sacrifice. You think, I cannot leave now after everything we built. But the painful reality is this. You cannot recover wasted years by wasting more years. And eventually, every placeholder relationship reaches a moment of truth. One person stops negotiating with reality. Sometimes because they finally leave. Sometimes because the other person finally chooses someone else. Sometimes because exhaustion becomes stronger than attachment. But clarity always arrives eventually. The only question is how much of yourself disappears before it does. So if this video found you at the exact moment where your instincts have been whispering that something feels wrong, listen carefully. Not to their promises, not to their potential, not to isolated moments of affection. Look at patterns. Patterns reveal commitment more honestly than words ever will. A person who wants a future with you behaves differently from a person who merely enjoys your presence. And deep down, most people already know which one they are experiencing. They are simply hoping reality changes before they are forced to accept it. But acceptance is not failure. Sometimes acceptance is the first moment your real life finally begins. And sometimes the most life-changing sentence you will ever say is this: I deserve clarity more than I fear losing them. Before you judge them, watch this first. The video now appearing on your screen will expose the hidden psychology behind women who choose to live alone without a man. Watch now. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.